Welcome to AI History of Western Philosophy. I'm thrilled to be back because today we're not just talking about history, we're talking about its very beginning, or, well, what's often called the beginning.
Right, the start line, so to speak.
Exactly. We're heading back to the dawn of Western thought, to a figure so foundational, yet so incredibly elusive, that his legacy continues to spark intense debate millennia later. His name is Thales of Miletus, and while many recognize him as the first philosopher, the fascinating, almost frustrating truth is that his actual words are pretty much entirely lost to time.
Indeed, the figure of Thales really challenges our very notion of what it means to do the history of philosophy. It really does.
How so?
Well, what's truly fascinating here, perhaps paradoxically, is that the scarcity of information about him. It's precisely what makes him so perpetually relevant for later philosophers. He's less a historical figure whose precise thoughts we can definitively, recover.
Right.
And more a philosophical Rorschach test, kind of a screen onto which subsequent thinkers have projected their own ideas.
That's such an insightful way to put it, a philosophical Rorschach test. And that in a nutshell is our mission for this episode of AI History of Western Philosophy.
Okay.
We're going to take an in-depth look at arguably the most enigmatic and philosophically fertile fragment attributed to Thales, the dictum, "All things are full of gods," or in its original Greek, pentapleretheon.
Ah, yes. That one.
This isn't just about trying to guess what Thales might have meant, which is, let's be honest, a big enough puzzle on its own.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about how this single ambiguous phrase became, as you said, this powerful philosophical mirror, reflecting the core ideas and agendas of pretty much every major thinker who looked back at it.
From Aristotle and Plato in antiquity.
Right through to the monumental figures like Hegel and Nietzsche in the modern era. They each saw their own philosophical systems validated or even maybe initiated in this ancient saying. It's kind of amazing.
It is. So we'll unpack what scholars call the problem of Thales. We'll explore the three main interpretations of this dictum, and then, perhaps most revealingly, we'll show how major philosophers instrumentalized Thales.
Instrumentalized, I like that term.
Yeah, because they weren't just passively reporting history, they were actively reshaping it. Recruiting Thales to build their own systems. And in doing so, they often reveal far more about their own philosophical projects than they do about Thales himself.
That makes sense.
It's a compelling story about how intellectual history is constantly being rewritten. It's less a linear progression, like a straight line, and more a dynamic, ongoing conversation with the past.
Okay, so settle in, because we're about to delve into the very origins of Western philosophy, or at least the narrative of its origin.
The story we tell about it.
Exactly. And discover just how fluid and contested those beginnings really are. So our journey begins in the 6th century BCE, in the bustling city of Miletus, on the coast of modern-day Turkey. This is where Thales is conventionally placed, often celebrated as the undisputed starting point of Western philosophy.
The ground zero.
Yeah. But there's a huge irony, isn't there, in how we approach him. His monumental importance seems almost inversely proportional to the certainty of our knowledge about him.
That's a keen observation. It really does seem that way.
He's this towering figure, yet shrouded in such profound uncertainty. It's almost as if the more significant a historical figure is, the more likely their true nature gets lost in the mists of interpretation, or maybe just myth.
That's a great point. It's a bit like trying to trace the headwaters of a mighty river when all you have are scattered anecdotes about a tiny spring. Miletus itself provides crucial context for this enigmatic figure.
Right, the city itself.
Yeah. It wasn't some sleepy, isolated backwater. Far from it. Miletus was a thriving, cosmopolitan port city, a true dynamic nexus of commerce, culture, and, intellectual exchange.
So a real melting pot.
Absolutely. Its strategic geographical position meant constant contact with the ancient Egyptian and Babylonian civilizations. This exposed its thinkers, including Thales, presumably to sophisticated systems of mathematics, astronomy, and, crucially, a diverse array of mythologies from across the Eastern Mediterranean.
Okay, so he wasn't working in a vacuum.
Not at all. This unique environment wasn't just a backdrop. It was the fertile ground for what would become a revolutionary new mode of inquiry, pushing beyond purely mythical explanations and towards something else entirely.
And that something else entirely is often presented as the traditional narrative, right? This idea of a radical break from mythos to logos.
Precisely.
Before Thales, the prevailing mythological worldview of the Hellenic world, codified by Homer and Hesiod, explained everything.
The weather, the crops, fate.
Yeah, from the changing seasons to the very formation of the world, even human affairs, as the direct actions of anthropomorphic gods, often driven by very human passions like jealousy or anger. The world was understood through sacred narratives, through mythos. So, how did Thales supposedly break from that?
Well, traditional narrative, established most forcefully by Aristotle and then really solidified in the 18th century, casts Thales as the first philosopher precisely because he initiated this supposed radical turn.
From myth to reason.
Yeah. He sought explanations for natural phenomena not in the arbitrary whims of the gods, but in natural, universal, and observable principles internal to the world itself.
Like the earthquake example.
Exactly. Instead of Poseidon's anger causing an earthquake, Thales, for example, suggests the Earth floated on water, and its rocking caused tremors. This is what's often celebrated as the Greek miracle, the sudden, almost miraculous birth of Western science and philosophy.
A clean break.
A clean break. A sudden surge of rationality. It's a very powerful and appealing story, isn't it? A narrative that neatly separates the dawn of reason from the age of myth.
It certainly is a powerful narrative, maybe a comforting one, perhaps, for those who want a clear origin point for rationality. But you're suggesting it's a powerful but potentially misleading historiographical construct. What does recent scholarship tell us that challenges this neat break?
That's right. More recent scholarship suggests a far more complex picture, one of transformation and adaptation rather than a complete rupture.
Yeah.
We see plausible influences from Near Eastern and Egyptian creation myths on Thales' own cosmological theories. For example, the idea of a primordial watery chaos from which all things arise that has echoes in ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian cosmologies.
Interesting. So not entirely out of the blue.
Not entirely. This suggests a more fluid transition, maybe a philosophizing with myth, abstracting from it, rather than a stark rejection.
Yeah.
And that title, First Philosopher, it wasn't a consensus view before Aristotle. It really became solidified much later in the 18th century, largely as an Aristotelian framing, which in itself, as we'll see, was an act of instrumentalizing Thales for a specific philosophical agenda.
So we're already seeing the historical record being shaped by later philosophical needs, even with the title itself. That brings us to the core difficulty of studying Thales, the source problem. We've mentioned we have no writings from him, which is just astonishing for someone so foundational.
It truly is astonishing, and it's a critical point for understanding the problem of Thales. We possess no writings from Thales himself. In fact, it's debated whether he ever wrote anything down at all.
Really? You might have just been an oral teacher.
It's possible. Our entire knowledge of him comes from what scholars call testimonial reports, summaries, and quotations found in the works of subsequent authors, primarily Plato, and above all, Aristotle.
These guys were writing centuries later.
Exactly. Centuries after Thales lived. This means that every single piece of information we have about Thales is already an interpretation, filtered through the lens of another thinker's agenda, and often their own well-defined, complex philosophical projects.
So it's like trying to see Thales through Aristotle-colored glasses or Plato-colored glasses.
Precisely. It's like trying to understand a distant echo through multiple layers of mist. Very difficult to get back to the original sound.
That makes it incredibly difficult to pin down what he actually thought. Beyond all things are full of gods, what other key ideas are attributed to him, and how do they add to this interpretive challenge? Because it seems like he's already defying easy categorization, even with these limited fragments.
He certainly does. His most famous doctrine, of course, is water as arche.
The arche, the origin or principle.
Right. Thales famously theorized that water is the fundamental origin, principle, and substratum of all things. This sounds deceptively simple, but it was revolutionary.
Why water, though?
Well, Aristotle, always the empiricist, speculated that Thales might have based this on empirical observations. That nourishment is moist, that heat seems to come from moisture, that seeds are wet and depend on water for life, things like that.
Okay, observing the natural world.
And also, water's observable ability to transform, from a liquid to a solid like ice or to a gas like steam. That would have further supported its candidacy as a universal principle that could underlie all existence.
So he's looking for a single material explanation for the world, not just a divine decree.
Yeah.
That really does sound like the shift from mythos to logos.
It does. Then there's his cosmological model. The Earth floats on water.
Which we now know isn't right, but
But scientifically incorrect from our modern perspective, sure, and certainly superseded later. But this was a radical move at the time. It offered a naturalistic explanation for phenomena like earthquakes.
Right, the rocking boat idea.
Exactly. It could be understood as the rocking of the terrestrial disk on an underlying ocean, rather than, say, the arbitrary wrath of Poseidon or some other deity. It's a significant step towards a rational, immanent understanding of the physical world.
And then, quite strikingly, we have the idea of the magnet having a soul. That sounds almost contradictory to the naturalistic, materialist explanations that we just discussed. How do we reconcile that?
This is a critical fragment, and it points directly to what scholars call the problem of coherence in Thales' thought.
The problem of coherence. Okay.
Thales is reported to have said that the lodestone, a naturally magnetized piece of mineral, has a suche, a soul, because it has the power to initiate motion in iron.
Soul because it moves things.
Exactly. What's significant here, and this is crucial for ancient Greek thought, is that he links the concept of soul not necessarily to consciousness or immortality in the modern sense, but to the capacity to be a source of movement.
Ah, okay. That's a different way of thinking about soul.
It is. For the Greeks, the ability to move oneself or to initiate motion in something else without being pushed was a key feature of living things. So if a magnet moves iron, it's acting like a living thing, possessing this capacity for motion, which is akin to having a soul.
It's remarkable how these seemingly disparate ideas, water as the origin, earth floating on water, and magnets having souls come together. But as you alluded to, on the surface, they seem to contradict each other. All is water sounds very materialist, while all things are full of gods and the magnet has a soul, leans towards vitalism, or even theology.
It does seem that way.
What does this mean for us trying to understand him, especially when these fragments seem on the surface so resistant to being neatly tied together?
Well, this raises an important question. Can we truly understand Thales, or only the Thales presented to us by later, very opinionated interpreters? The scholarly impulse, and it's a strong one, is to try and weave these disparate fragments into a single, consistent system.
We like coherence.
We do. We want our foundational thinkers to be coherent, to present a unified worldview. But this very effort to force coherence itself often reveals a philosophical bias. It presupposes that Thales, as a great thinker, must have possessed a unified system.
Which might be reading our values back onto him.
Exactly. It's a modern and perhaps anachronistic valuation of systematicity. The problem of Thales' coherence may actually be a problem created entirely by his interpreters, a reflection of our need for neat philosophical categories.
So maybe he just said different things at different times, or in different contexts.
It's perfectly possible these fragments derive from different contexts or stages of his thought, and that the search for a single, seamless worldview imposes a structure that was never there. In a very real sense, the fragments might be less about him and more about the history of interpretation itself, and how later philosophers wrestle with ambiguity.
That makes a lot of sense. It suggests that his enduring fascination lies not just in his ideas, but in their very elusiveness. Given that challenge, how do we even begin to unpack the enigma of all things are full of gods? It sounds like the ultimate philosophical Rorschach test, as you called it.
It truly is. The dictum panta plere theon stands as one of the most enigmatic and philosophically fertile fragments from antiquity precisely due to its profound ambiguity.
So much packed into so few words.
Exactly. This ambiguity has given rise to three major interpretive frameworks, each of which, as we'll see, constructs a different Thales and places him at the head of a distinct intellectual tradition.
Three main ways to read it.
Right. These three strands, the proto-scientific, the hylozoist or panpsychist, and the myth continuity, form the foundational possibilities that later philosophers would adopt, blend, and manipulate to suit their own ends. Understanding them is really key to understanding Thales' afterlife.
Okay, let's dive into the first one, the proto-scientific interpretation. What's the core thesis here, and why does it paint Thales as the trailblazer of science?
This view is particularly popular among those who want to emphasize Thales' role as the father of science and rationalism. Its core thesis is that the dictum, all things are full of gods, represents a revolutionary secularization of the divine.
Secularization. How so?
According to this interpretation, when Thales speaks of gods, he's not referring to the anthropomorphic, capricious deities of the Olympian pantheon we discussed earlier.
Not Zeus and Hera.
No. Instead, the term gods is redefined to signify immanent, non-personal natural forces, universal laws, or perhaps even the animating, rational principle of the cosmos itself.
So it's not about Zeus throwing lightning bolts, but about the laws that govern lightning, or maybe the inherent energy within the storm.
Exactly that kind of idea. In this reading, Thales effectively brings the gods down to earth, locating the divine within the observable processes of nature rather than in some supernatural realm beyond it.
Okay.
To say all things are full of gods is thus to say that the world is governed by intelligible, inherent principles, and that one need not look outside of nature for explanations.
That's a very rationalist take.
It is. This interpretation has the great advantage of rendering Thales a consistent rationalist. It aligns the dictum with his other naturalistic explanations, like water as the arche or his theory of earthquakes. The religious language, in this view, is seen merely as a concession to the vernacular of his time.
Like a figure of speech, almost.
Sort of. A way of expressing new secular concepts using old, familiar terms, much like we might still say the sun rises, even though we know the earth revolves. It's using the language available.
That certainly makes a lot of sense if you want to claim Thales for the lineage of scientific inquiry. What's the second interpretation, and how does it shift our understanding of his philosophy? It sounds quite different.
It is quite different. The second framework is the hylozoist or panpsychist interpretation. This one treats the dictum not as a statement of early physics, but as a profound metaphysical claim about the nature of reality itself.
Metaphysical. Okay.
It posits that Thales was a hylozoist, from the Greek hyle, meaning matter, and zouri, meaning life, believing that all matter is fundamentally alive.
All matter's alive.
Wow. Or even stronger, perhaps a panpsychist, from pan meaning all and psyche meaning soul, or mind, believing that all things possess some kind of mind-like quality, however rudimentary.
And what would gods mean in that context? Is it like a universal consciousness or life force?
Pretty much. Here, the divine is identified with soul, suje, the principle of life and motion, which is understood as being intermingled throughout the entire universe.
Okay.
This view finds its strongest support in Aristotle's commentary in his work De Anima, or On the Soul. Aristotle explicitly links the dictum to the proposition that soul is intermingled in the whole universe.
So Aristotle himself connects it to soul.
He does, and he connects it directly to Thales's other assertion that the magnet has a soul because it moves iron. The logic follows.
Yeah.
If the defining characteristic of soul is the power to initiate motion, and if this power is a divine attribute, then the universe, being full of motion and change, must logically be full of soul and therefore full of gods.
That makes a certain kind of sense.
It does. This interpretation positions Thales not as a proto-scientist, but as the progenitor of a long and venerable tradition of vitalist and panpsychist metaphysics. A lineage that includes thinkers like the Stoics, Spinoza, Leibniz, and even contemporary philosophers of mind who ponder the consciousness of matter.
So it's less about a natural force and more about an inherent animating principle. And you mentioned a subtle ambiguity within the Greek word for full of, plere. How does that nuance play out here?
Yes, that's a good point. There's a subtle but crucial ambiguity within this view, hinging on plere. It's unclear whether it means things are composed of gods.
Like made of divine stuff.
Exactly, making the objects themselves divine and conscious from their very essence. Or does it mean merely crammed or laden with gods?
More like containers for the divine.
Right. Suggesting divine beings or aspects of divinity inhabit matter without the matter itself necessarily being conscious or divine. That distinction makes a big difference in the precise nature of the panpsychism or hylozoism attributed to him. It really highlights how much can hang on a single word when reconstructing ancient thought.
That's fascinating. So much room for interpretation from just one phrase. And the third interpretation, how does it stack up against these first two?
The third is the myth continuity interpretation. This reading serves as a direct counter-narrative to the proto-scientific radical break thesis we discussed earlier, the idea of the Greek miracle.
So challenging the clean break idea again.
Exactly. It argues that the dictum, all things are full of gods, is neither nascent science nor abstract metaphysics, but rather a philosophical articulation and generalization of the specific immanent divinity already found in theogonic myths of Greece and the ancient Near East.
So he wasn't rejecting the gods, but perhaps reconceptualizing or abstracting from them. He's almost like a bridge figure in this view.
Precisely. Think of Hesiodo's theogony, for example. Cosmic entities like the Earth, Gaia, or the sky, Uranos, are not merely ruled by gods. They literally are gods, born of chaos, and their very existence embodies divinity.
Right, the personification of natural forces as deities.
Yes.
Yeah.
For someone who accepted this mythological framework, the statement, all things are full of gods, would be a straightforward description of reality, almost a truism, a statement of fact.
Of course they are. Look around.
Kind of like that, yeah. This interpretation powerfully explains why the dictum speaks of gods in the plural, which fits perfectly with the polytheism of the surrounding culture. It connects Thales' thought not to some generic primitive animism found in many cultures, but to the very specific and peculiar mythological tradition of the Mediterranean, where divinity and physical reality were often identical.
Okay.
In this light, Thales becomes a transitional figure who philosophizes with and out of myth, abstracting a general principle from it, rather than simply reacting against it or breaking away entirely. He is generalizing a deep-seated cultural intuition about the world.
It's clear that these three interpretations paint wildly different pictures of Thales, making him a scientific pioneer, a vitalist metaphysician, or a mythic abstractor. It's quite the range.
It really is.
But why do these distinct schools of thought persist? And what does it tell us about our own modern biases when we look back at figures like Thales?
Well, the persistence of these distinct interpretive schools is incredibly revealing. It's not just a consequence of scant historical evidence, though that's part of it. It's also a reflection of the intellectual structures of the modern world.
How so?
For Thales and his contemporaries, the disciplinary boundaries between what we now call science, metaphysics, and religion simply didn't exist. These fields were all part of a single, undifferentiated inquiry into the nature of the cosmos, or physis.
Ah, so we're imposing our categories back onto him.
Pretty much. The modern debate over whether Thales was really a scientist, a metaphysician, or a religious thinker is thus profoundly anachronistic. It's almost a proxy war between modern academic disciplines, each seeking to claim this foundational figure for its own intellectual lineage.
So the science department wants him, the philosophy department wants him, maybe the religion department too.
Exactly. The proto-scientific view makes him the father of science. The hylozoist view claims him for metaphysics and philosophy of mind. And the myth continuity view situates him within classics and the history of religion. Each field finds its own reflection in Thales.
So what does this all mean for us, the listeners, trying to make sense of this? That we can never truly know what Thales intended, or that his ambiguity is precisely his genius, perhaps, for being so adaptable to different philosophical projects?
This raises an important question, doesn't it? The most historically sensitive approach may be to see Thales' thought as a pre-differentiated whole, maybe like a seed containing elements that would only later, over centuries of philosophical development, blossom into these distinct fields of knowledge.
A seed. I like that image.
His ambiguity, far from being a flaw, is what makes him so fertile for reinterpretation, allowing him to be claimed by so many different traditions. It's a testament to the enduring power of foundational, yet ambiguous, ideas.
So we've seen how Thales's "all things are full of gods" is shrouded in historical ambiguity and open to multiple, often contradictory interpretations. It's a real puzzle. But the philosophical afterlife of this dictum began almost immediately with the thinkers who established the very foundations of the Western canon, Plato and Aristotle.
The big two.
Right. Their accounts, however, as we've started to see, are far from being neutral historical records. Instead, they're the first and most influential instances of Thales' instrumentalization.
There's the word again.
Yeah, where his fragmentary legacy is marshaled, organized, and repurposed to serve the architectural needs of new and vastly more complex philosophical systems.
It's almost like they were editing their own version of AI history of Western philosophy.
That's a great analogy. It's a crucial point. These aren't just historical reports. They are philosophical arguments conducted through history. They are building their own intellectual empires, and Thales serves as an important foundational stone, whether they fully understood him or not, or even cared to. Let's start with Aristotle's Thales, the first cause in the making. How does Aristotle, our primary source of the pre-Socratics, approach Thales, and what was his larger agenda in doing so?
Right. Aristotle of Stagira is, for better or worse, our primary and indispensable source for the philosophy of Thales and the other pre-Socratics. His standard method of inquiry, evident throughout his treatises, was to begin by surveying the reputable opinions, or endoxa, of his predecessors on a given topic.
Looking at what others said first.
Exactly. This doxographical review, however, was not an exercise in disinterested history. It was a dialectical tool designed to identify the puzzles, or aporii, in earlier thought, and to then strategically position his own theories as the coherent and comprehensive solution that resolves them.
So he's not just reporting what came before. He's building a case for himself, showing how he's the culmination of all prior thought. It sounds incredibly strategic.
Oh, it's incredibly strategic. This agenda is nowhere more apparent than in his treatment of Thales and Metaphysics, Book 1. Here, Aristotle famously crowns Thales as the founder of this kind of philosophy, that is, natural philosophy. He achieves this by selectively focusing on the proposition that the arche, the principle or origin of all things, is water. Aristotle interprets this as the very first search for what he would later codify as the material cause, the underlying stuff from which things are made. This is a brilliant retrospective move.
And this feeds into his grander system, doesn't it? He's setting the stage for his own four causes.
Absolutely. This framing is absolutely central to Aristotle's philosophical project. He constructs a history of philosophy that progresses teleologically, meaning as if guided by an unseen purpose or an end goal toward the discovery of his own doctrine of the four causes: the material, the formal, the efficient, and the final cause.
Gotcha. Like history was aiming for Aristotle all along.
Pretty much, in his view. In this grand narrative, Thales plays the crucial role of the originator, the one who took the first essential step. He correctly identified the need to search for a cause and even grasped one of the four types, the material.
But only one.
But only one. In Aristotle's telling, Thales and his Milesian successors remained naively unaware of the other, more sophisticated causes. This narrative strategy brilliantly accomplishes two goals at once. It honors Thales as a venerable ancestor, giving Aristotle's own project a distinguished lineage.
Gives him credibility.
While simultaneously demonstrating the primitiveness of that ancestor, thereby positioning Aristotle's four-part causal framework as the necessary and complete culmination of the entire philosophical tradition. It's a masterful move of intellectual jujitsu.
So, if all is water fits so neatly into Aristotle's material cause schema, what about all things are full of gods? How does that dictum fit into this otherwise tidy picture? It seems to present a bit of a challenge to his naturalist image of Thales.
It absolutely does present a challenge to his neat schema. The all things are full of gods. Dictum doesn't comfortably fit within the category of a material cause, and it threatens to disrupt the image of Thales as a pure naturalist or physiologos, a student of nature.
So what does he do with it? Ignore it?
Not ignore it, but he strategically compartmentalizes it. He doesn't discuss it in the metaphysics alongside the water as arche theory. Instead, he addresses it in a different work, De Anima, or On the Soul, where his primary concern is to define the nature of the soul, or suche.
Okay. He puts it in the soul box.
Exactly. In this context, Aristotle connects the dictum to the idea that soul is mixed in the all, and to the specific example of the magnet, which Thales supposedly claimed has a soul because it is a source of motion. By filing the statement under the study of the soul, Aristotle contains its seemingly unscientific or theological character within a separate, manageable domain.
Right.
Interpreting it through his own theory of soul as a principle of life and motion. It's almost as if he's saying, this part goes here, not there, because it fits my system better.
It's almost like he's trying to tidy up Thales, to make him fit his own philosophical categories. But it's also important to remember that Aristotle himself was cautious about his interpretations, wasn't he? He wasn't making definitive historical claims, or was he?
He was, and this is a vital point often overlooked by later commentators who tend to treat Aristotle's reports as gospel truth. Aristotle himself expresses significant caution and uncertainty in these reports.
Yeah.
He prefaces his claims with qualifying phrases such as, from what is recorded, it seems, and most tellingly, perhaps, when linking the full of God's dictum to the idea of a world soul.
Perhaps. That doesn't sound very certain.
Not at all. These are the careful words of a scholar engaging in reasoned conjecture about a poorly documented predecessor, not the confident assertions of a historian reporting established facts. This scholarly reservation is frequently elided by later commentators, who often treat Aristotle's tentative reconstructions as direct and reliable testimony.
So later readers kind of hearten his suggestions into facts.
That happens a lot in intellectual history. It's a great example of how later interpreters can inadvertently or intentionally solidify an uncertainty into a fact.
So his instrumentalization of Thales is quite profound then. He's not just describing history, he's actively constructing it to serve his own philosophical goals.
Precisely. Ultimately, Aristotle's treatment of Thales is not a neutral historical account, but a masterful act of philosophical argument conducted through the medium of historiography. He faces the challenge of establishing his own complex four-cause model of explanation as the definitive one. His solution is to construct a historical narrative where his predecessors are cast as brilliant but incomplete thinkers who collectively, and without realizing it, groped their way toward the truth that only he, Aristotle, would finally articulate in full. He dossiers Thales' ideas, filing all as water under metaphysics to inaugurate the search for the material cause, and filing all things are full of gods under de anima to begin the inquiry into soul as a motive principle. This strategic organization allows Aristotle to claim Thales as his intellectual ancestor while simultaneously cementing Thales' status as a primitive forerunner.
Wow.
Thales is thus instrumentalized, transformed into the perfect year-one student in Aristotle's grand history of philosophy, a history whose curriculum inevitably validates the teacher's own system. This is arguably the single most influential act of philosophical appropriation in the Western tradition, setting the terms for how Thales would be understood for millennia.
Now let's turn to Plato. How does his engagement with the Thaleton dictum contrast with Aristotle's more historical, systematizing approach? Does he also need Thales for his own grand project?
Plato's engagement presents a fascinating contrast. While Aristotle historicizes Thales to create a philosophical lineage and demonstrate his own culmination, Plato, in a sense, dehistoricizes the saying. He transforms it into a timeless truth to be wielded in a pressing contemporary battle.
Dehistoricizes. Okay. How?
In Book X of his final work, Laws, Plato employs a nearly identical phrase, all things are full of gods, yet with a crucial difference. He never attributes it to Thales.
He doesn't say, as Thales said.
Nope. The connection is made only by later writers who, familiar with Aristotle's work, read the attribution back into Plato's text.
So it's like a famous quote that gets recycled over centuries, but the original author gets lost and then later credited through association. That's a clever way to borrow authority, isn't it?
Exactly. It's very clever. The context of Plato's argument is paramount here. Laws Book X is a sustained and passionate polemic against the materialist philosophers of his day thinkers like the atomists, perhaps.
The ones saying everything is just atoms and void.
Right. Whom he accused of promoting a dangerous form of atheism that threatens to dissolve the moral fabric of the city-state. His central counter-argument is that soul, psyche, is metaphysically and chronologically prior to body.
Soul comes first.
Soul comes first. Soul, for Plato, is the self-moving principle, the ultimate source of all motion, change, and order in the universe. The body, by contrast, is merely inert matter, which can only be moved and arranged by soul.
And this leads directly into his philosophical theology, right? He's building an argument for divine order, for the gods.
Indeed. From this premise, Plato builds a philosophical theology to serve as the unshakable foundation for his ideal political order. He points to the heavens, arguing that the beautiful, regular, and complex motions of the celestial bodies, the stars and planets, cannot possibly be the product of blind material necessity.
They're too orderly to be random.
That's his argument. Such orderly movement, he contends, is irrefutable proof that the stars and planets are governed by supremely good, rational, and therefore divine souls. Thus, the heavenly bodies are, in fact, gods. It is at the climax of this argument that the Athenian stranger, Plato's mouthpiece, poses a rhetorical question, almost a challenge to his opponents. After acknowledging that divine soul orders the cosmos, is there anyone who acknowledges this and yet holds that all things are not full of gods?
Wow. So he's not just quoting Thales. He's taking this ancient, almost proverbial saying and completely re-engineering its meaning. He's infusing it with his own mature metaphysics.
Precisely. Here we witness a subtle but profound act of appropriation. Plato takes what was likely an ancient, perhaps proverbial saying, and completely re-engineers it to serve his own sophisticated philosophical project. He infuses the phrase with the core tenets of his mature metaphysics, the theory of the soul as a transcendent, self-moving principle, and the concept of an anima mundi, a world soul that intelligently governs the cosmos according to rational mathematical principles.
So Plato's gods are very different from whatever Thales might have meant.
Oh, entirely different. In Plato's hands, the gods that fill all things are no longer the immanent, nature-bound figures of Hesiodic myth, nor are they a simple, undifferentiated life force, as a hylozoist might conceive them. They are the transcendent, intelligent agents, almost like the divine craftsmen of his Timaeus. Very Platonic gods.
And this is incredibly strategic, isn't it? Yeah. He's grounding his new radical ideas in something that sounds ancient and authoritative, giving them the weight of traditions, like saying, see, even the ancients knew this, I'm just articulating it more clearly.
Exactly. This maneuver reveals a key aspect of Plato's philosophical strategy. His project in the Laws is profoundly innovative to construct a rational philosophical theology as the new bedrock for political life, a direct response to what he perceives as a corrosive modern trend of atheistic materialism.
He needed to fight back.
He felt he did. To do so effectively, he needs to ground his radical proposals in something that feels traditional, pious, and authoritative, not like a mere personal invention. By reaching for an archaic-sounding phrase like "all things are full of gods," he cloaks his philosophical revolution in the garb of ancestral piety.
Using the old words for new meanings?
Exactly. He uses the form of an old belief to provide legitimacy for a radically new content. The past is not being recovered in an archaeological sense. It is being repurposed as a powerful tool to solve a contemporary crisis.
So Plato's use is different from Aristotle's.
Very distinct. Aristotle needs a historical Thales to begin his philosophical timeline and validate his system. Plato needs a timeless, anonymous truth to win a present-day argument about the very fabric of society. This exemplifies how foundational figures are continuously resculpted by the intellectual needs of subsequent eras.
It's truly incredible how two giants of philosophy, Plato and Aristotle, both needed Thales, but for such fundamentally different reasons. Aristotle wanted him to kick off his logical historical progression, and Plato wanted an ancient, anonymous stamp of approval for his own radical ideas to combat what he saw as societal decay. This really highlights the malleability of history itself.
It absolutely does, and the story doesn't end there, not by a long shot. Centuries later, Thales' fragments gained new life in 19th century European philosophy.
Ah, the moderns arrive.
Yes. Thinkers like Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel and Friedrich Nietzsche resurrected and reinvented him, transforming him from a distant historical curiosity into a pivotal figure for their profoundly different and often opposing philosophical visions.
This is where we see some of the most dramatic reinventions of Thales, isn't it? These thinkers weren't just interpreting him, they were conscripting him into their own grand narratives about history, spirit, and human culture.
That's a good way to put it, conscripting him.
Let's start with Hegel's Thales, the dawn of spirit. For Hegel, history isn't just a sequence of events, is it? It's something far more grand and purposeful.
Not at all. For Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, the history of philosophy is no mere catalog of disparate opinions. It is the single, rational, and necessary process of the absolute idea or world spirit, Geist, progressively coming to know itself.
Geist, spirit or mind, right.
Right. This unfolding is not linear, but dialectical, moving through a triadic rhythm from an immediate, simple, abstract unity, the thesis, through self-division into particularity and opposition, the antithesis, to a higher, richer, and more articulated concrete unity that preserves and overcomes the previous stages, the synthesis, or Aufhebung.
So if I'm understanding Aufhebung correctly, it's not just discarding the old idea, but transforming it into something new and more complete, almost like a philosophical evolution, building upon what came before.
Precisely. Think of it like a spiral staircase. You return to the same point, but at a higher level, incorporating what came before, transcending and preserving simultaneously. It's a key concept for him. Within this grand teleological system, philosophy must have an absolute beginning, a first, pure, simple thought. For Hegel, this necessary starting point is Thales.
Thales again at the beginning.
Thales is not merely historically first, he is logically first. He represents the moment that Geist, previously immersed in the immediacy of nature and the picture thinking, forestelling, of mythology, first awakens to itself as pure thought, as abstract universality.
And which fragment represents this for Hegel?
He seizes upon the proposition, all is water, as the crucial world historical statement. Its significance lies not in its empirical validity, which Hegel dismisses as irrelevant, but in its abstract universality.
Ah, the abstraction again.
Yes. For the first time, thought grasps the idea that the essence of all particular sensuous things is a single universal principle that is itself not purely sensuous, but an object of pure thought.
So for Hegel, it's less about the actual water itself and more about the concept of a single underlying universal principle. The breakthrough is in the abstraction, not the material.
Exactly. As Hegel puts it in his lectures on the history of philosophy, the proposition of Thales that water is the absolute is the beginning of philosophy, because with it the consciousness has arrived at that essence. The true, the one, is alone the self-subsisting.
Wow, that's a big claim for All is water.
It is. This is, for Hegel, the birth of philosophy itself. The moment thought posits a universal that stands over and against the chaos of particulars. The proposition is objective, yet its content water is still a natural, sensuous thing. This makes it the perfect in itself and such stage of philosophy. Pure, abstract, but not yet fully conscious of itself as pure thought. It's the initial glimmer of the absolute realizing itself.
So if all is water is so crucial for Hegel's starting point, the absolute logical beginning for philosophy, what happens to all things are full of gods, that seems like it would create a bit of a rankle in his perfectly logical system. Well,
less abstract. It absolutely does. The dictum, all things are full of gods, is, by contrast, deeply problematic for Hegel's clean, logical starting point. It represents a regression, in his view, to a less developed stage of consciousness.
a step backward.
He interprets it as a remnant of the pre-philosophical, mythological consciousness and undifferentiated pantheism, still mired in the sensuous representation of multiple particular gods. It has not yet achieved the pure, abstract universality that all is water represents.
Yeah, what does he do with it in his system?
Therefore, in Hegel's dialectical narrative, this idea is a primitive element that is immediately sublated, or aufgehoben.
Ah, that term again. Negated but preserved and lifted up.
Exactly. It's simultaneously negated, preserved in a higher form, and lifted up by the more properly philosophical proposition that all is water. The mythological plurality of gods is negated in favor of the single universal principle of water, which is the first, albeit imperfect, expression of the absolute. It's a messy thought that gets tidied up by the inexorable march of Geist.
That's a truly radical instrumentalization, then. He's effectively reshaping history, selecting certain fragments and dismissing others, all to fit his own system's logical necessity. Thales becomes almost a tool in Hegel's hands, not a person.
It's perhaps the most radical form of instrumentalization imaginable. The historical Thales, the man from Miletus, is almost entirely effaced and replaced by a logical placeholder in the autobiography of Geist.
An autobiography of spirit.
Wow. Yeah. Hegel is not engaged in a historical reconstruction. He is demonstrating the logical necessity of his own system. His dialectical method requires a starting point that is purely universal and abstract, but not yet self-conscious. He scours the historical record and finds in the fragments of Thales the perfect raw material.
And all is water fits the bill.
Perfectly. He then selectively elevates the one proposition that perfectly fits this logical requirement, all is water, and systematically demotes or reinterprets any fragment that complicates this pristine beginning. The full of gods dictum is messy. It smells of religion, particularity, and myth, the very things philosophy must overcome to begin its rational journey. Therefore, it must be characterized as a primitive residue that philosophy, in its very first act, transcends.
So Thales exists for Hegel's system.
For Hegel, Thales' importance is not historical, but systematic. He is a function, not a person, in the grand narrative of world spirit.
Okay, now let's jump to Nietzsche, who seems to offer a complete inversion of this entire philosophical tradition that leads to Hegel.
He's coming at this from a totally different angle, right?
Oh, completely. Friedrich Nietzsche's engagement with Thales represents a direct and polemical inversion of the entire philosophical tradition that preceded him, especially the rationalism of Plato and the systematic logic of Hegel.
Polemical. So he's picking a fight, definitely. Nietzsche's overarching project was a revaluation of all values, a radical critique of the Socratic Platonic tradition of rationalism, dialectic, and morality, which he diagnosed as a symptom of cultural sickness and decay.
He wasn't a fan of Socrates and Plato.
Not at all. In contrast, he lionized the pre-Socratic thinkers, those philosophers before Socrates, as exemplars of a healthier, stronger, more aristocratic, tragic culture, a culture of noble creators who possess the strength to affirm life in its totality with all its suffering and contradiction.
So he's looking for heroes before Socrates came along and, in his view, poisoned the well with his emphasis on reason and dialectic. He wants to find a different kind of origin for philosophy.
Precisely. He's looking for a stronger, more vital starting point. In his early, unfinished, but highly influential work Philosophy in the Tragic Age of the Greeks, Nietzsche undertakes a radical revaluation of Thales' significance.
Okay, what does he make of him?
He finds the proposition all is water to be of monumental importance, not for its scientific accuracy or logical defensibility,
Like Hegel.
but precisely because it is preposterous, unprovable, an artistic metaphysical generalization.
Preposterous. That sounds like an insult, but for Nietzsche.
For Nietzsche, this is not a flaw, but a sign of immense strength, a philosophical genius. He identifies 3 reasons for taking Thales' propositions seriously. First, it makes a profound statement about the ultimate origin of things. Second, it does so without myth or fable, representing a new kind of intellectual honesty and a turn toward nature. And third, and most importantly for Nietzsche,
Yes.
it contains, in the chrysalis state, the idea everything is one. This drive to see unity and multiplicity is not, for Nietzsche, the product of sober reason, but of a metaphysical thought, which had its origin in mystic intuition.
Mystic intuition.
Right.
That's a direct challenge to the idea that philosophy starts with pure reason or empirical observation. He's championing intuition, even wild, unprovable leaps, over logic and systematic thought. It's almost a romantic view of early philosophy.
Absolutely. It's a celebration of the non-rational, or perhaps the pre-rational. This interpretation is a direct assault on the traditional philosophical hierarchy. Where Plato and Hegel valued reason and logic above all else, Nietzsche champions intuition, imagination, and creative power.
The power of the genius.
Right. He sees Thales' thought not as a clumsy first step in scientific reasoning, but as a magnificent leap of the philosophical genius, an act of creative imagination and analogy that outstrips the plodding pace of logic and empiricism. For Nietzsche, a philosophy is great not because it is provable, but because it is powerful and life-affirming.
And how does all things are full of gods fit into Nietzsche's framework? Does he also demote it, like Hegel, or does it take on a new significance for him?
While Nietzsche's primary focus in his analysis of Thales is the water proposition, the dictum, all things are full of gods, fits perfectly within his framework. He doesn't dwell on it as much, but he would certainly have seen it as another example of a powerful, unprovable, world-shaping intuition.
So not primitive, but powerful.
Exactly. It is not a scientific statement to be verified, nor a theological dogma to be believed, but an expression of a profound feeling about the nature of reality. It signifies an overflowing strength, a will to power that sees the divine not as an external transcendent being, but as an immanent vital quality of existence itself.
Like the world itself is divine in a way.
Yes, it is, for Nietzsche, the expression of a spirit so rich that it deifies the world, seeing life and divinity everywhere, a kind of radical affirmation of existence, very different from Plato's transcendent gods or Hegel's abstract spirit.
So Nietzsche completely inverts the traditional reading of Thales. He's not the first scientist or logician, but the first artist-philosopher. He's almost using Thales as a weapon against the very tradition that claims Thales as its founder.
Yes, his interpretation is deeply polemical. The tradition since Plato had valued reason, logic, and dialectic over instinct and intuition. Hegel, its culmination, saw Thales as the first step on this inexorable path of reason. Nietzsche utterly rejects this valuation.
He sees reason as weakness.
He sees the dominance of reason and logic as a sign of weakness, a decadence that began with Socrates' turn to morality and dialectics. He therefore champions Thales for precisely what the rationalist tradition either ignored or tried to explain away, the illogical, mystic, creative leap of imagination.
So Thales is great because he was illogical, in a way.
In Nietzsche's view, yes. Thales is great not because he was the first scientist, but because he was the first great philosophical artist. Nietzsche instrumentalizes Thales as the archetype of his own ideal philosopher, the noble, solitary creator of values who imposes his vision upon the world. Thales becomes the first hero in Nietzsche's counter-history of philosophy, a powerful weapon to be wielded against Socrates, Plato, and the entire moral rationalistic tradition that he held responsible for the decline of the West. He transforms Thales from the first logician into the first tragic poet of philosophy.
It's incredible how a single obscure fragment can become so central to such wildly different, monumental philosophical projects. Hegel and Nietzsche. You couldn't get much further apart in how they use Thales.
Worlds apart.
It really makes you wonder what kind of mirror we're looking into when we study history, and whether we're ever truly seeing the past, or just our own reflection, our own needs.
Indeed. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it underscores that intellectual history is less about linear progress and more about a continuous creative engagement with the past, always informed by the needs and questions of the present. It's a dynamic rather than static endeavor.
The long and varied journey of the Thaletan fragment, Pantopleretheon, from its obscure origins in 6th century BCE Miletus to its myriad modern reconstructions, really offers a profound lesson in the nature of philosophical history itself. It's clear now that interpreting the past is never a neutral act of archaeology, is it? an active, creative, and often polemical enterprise in which the fragmentary remains of prior thought are perpetually remade to serve the intellectual, cultural, and philosophical imperatives of the present.
And crucially, the very qualities that make Thales so historically frustrating, the absence of his own writings and the profound ambiguity of the secondhand reports, are precisely what make him so philosophically productive.
The frustration becomes fuel.
Exactly. The dictum, all things are full of gods, functions less as a clear proposition to be understood and more, as you eloquently put it, host, as a philosophical mirror, reflecting the core commitments, anxieties, and aspirations of whoever gazes into it.
It truly is a philosophical mirror, revealing as much about the viewer as the viewed. Let's just briefly recap the parade of reflections we've seen because it's quite a lineup.
Okay. First, Aristotle. In his monumental quest to establish his own four-cause schema as the culmination of all prior inquiry, he looked into the mirror and saw the faint, primitive outline of his material cause in Thales's water theory.
Right.
While carefully sequestering the full of God's dictum into the separate study of the soul. He needed a beginning for his history of philosophy, and he brilliantly fashioned Thales into the perfect, brilliant, but incomplete first chapter, setting the stage for his own triumph.
Then Plato. Facing what he perceived as a profound contemporary crisis of atheistic materialism threatening the very fabric of society, he looked into the mirror and saw a reflection of the divinely ordered cosmos he needed to ground his political and moral project. He weaponized the archaic piety of the phrase, infusing it with his own sophisticated metaphysics of a transcendent world soul to lend ancestral authority to his revolutionary ideas. His goal was to stabilize the city, and Thales became an unwitting ally.
Then Hegel, requiring an absolute logical beginning for the dialectical self-unfolding of world spirit through history, saw in the mirror the pure, abstract universality of thought at its dawn.
The birth of Geist.
Right. He elevated all as water as the first moment of philosophy's logical genesis and systematically demoted all things are full of gods as a pre-philosophical remnant. He retrofitted the historical evidence to the a priori demands of his own comprehensive logical system, showcasing the unfolding of reason itself.
And finally, Nietzsche. In his quest to overturn the entire Socratic Platonic tradition, that long lineage of reason and morality he saw as decadent, gazed into the same mirror and saw the defiant, powerful face of the tragic artist-philosopher.
The creator.
Exactly. He celebrated Thales not for his reason or scientific beginnings, but for his illogical creative intuition, transforming him into the first hero of a counter-history of philosophy, an exemplar of the noble spirit that affirms life through the creation of values. He remade Thales into his own image.
And we should add, finally, modern scholars, looking back through the lenses of their own disciplinary specializations, continue this very tradition. Historians of science see a proto-scientist, metaphysicians see a proto-panpsychist, and classicists see a figure deeply embedded in the mythological continuity of his time.
Everyone sees their own Thales.
Each perspective claims a piece of Thales, reflecting, in a way, the fragmented nature of modern knowledge itself, perhaps unable to fully integrate these disparate insights without the original context which is lost to us.
The story of all things are full of gods thus serves as a powerful case study for us in AI history of Western philosophy. It demonstrates that the history of philosophy is not a simple progression of truths or a passive uncovering of facts. It's messy.
It's very messy. Instead, it's a dynamic dialogue between past and present, a continuous process of appropriation and reinterpretation. The enduring plasticity of such a fragment ensures that as long as philosophy continues to ask fundamental questions about the nature of reality, knowledge, and its own history, thinkers will continue to return to the myths of Miletus.
And they'll keep looking into that mirror.
And in the enigmatic words of the first philosopher, they will continue to find a reflection of themselves. Ultimately, the quest to understand Thales, in the end, reveals more about the nature of understanding itself and maybe about ourselves than it does about the man.
That's a profound thought to end on. So after hearing how these philosophical giants reinterpreted the past, often for their own purposes, what stands out to you about how we approach history today? What implications does it have for how we try to understand complex ideas or figures from the past, even in our own time? Something for you, our listeners, to think about. Thank you for joining us for this episode of AI History of Western Philosophy.